Hello and welcome to my video all about how to make a dodecahedron party garland. I had bought some fairy lights, but the garland itself was quite plain, so I thought about what I needed to add to it to add a bit more shimmer and more reflection and sparkle. My conclusion was that I needed to add some shapes with lots of facets as well as some iridescent film. And the final result was this dodecahedron garland. For this project you will need A4 sized printable acetate sheets. These kind of acetate sheets are normally used on overhead projectors, and you can print on them using a normal inkjet printer. You'll need to use one sheet per shape. You'll also need an inkjet printer, some transparent iridescent film. I bought this in a roll and it was in the gift wrap section. Some strong double-sided tape. The tape that I used was 5mm wide. Some scissors, a metal ruler, an X-Acto knife and cutting mat, some invisible thread, an awl, a bone folder or a plastic ruler or something similar, a long upholstery needle, if you have one, and finally you need some kind of lighting or some way to display these shapes. So that could be some fairy lights, or a decorative bowl, or even some battery-powered tea lights. Okay, so how do you make these dodecahedron shapes? Well, the first step is to print out the template for these shapes onto the acetate sheets. Take a look in the description box below this video to find a link to the dodecahedron template, and also I've included a link to a diamond shape template as well, which could also be very effective. I simply used my inkjet printer to print the dodecahedron template as large as I could onto an acetate sheet. I wanted to make 5 shapes, so I printed out 5 templates. If you want to make an even larger shape, you'll need to split the template between multiple sheets, and then tape the parts together. You will then need to use your scissors to cut all the way around the template shape. Next, place the acetate shape on a cutting mat and use a metal ruler and an X-Acto knife to carefully score along the remaining lines inside the shape itself. So basically you need to take your X-Acto knife and drag it along all the remaining black lines. Just be careful that you don't cut along these lines, you just want to score them to make them easier to fold. Then turn the acetate shape over so that the scored lines are on the underside. Cut out a piece of iridescent film that's just a little bit larger than the acetate shape, and set this to one side. We then need to cut short sections of double-sided tape and add these pieces to the flaps around the outside of the acetate shape. I put a piece of tape on alternating flaps rather than on every single one. Once you've done that, remove the protective film off the pieces of tape and then lay the iridescent film over the top of the acetate so that it lies completely flat. Then press the iridescent film down all over so that it sticks properly to the tape. You then need to cut off all the excess iridescent film so that it ends up the same shape as the acetate. You then need to cut off the iridescent film that lies above the acetate flaps where there is no double-sided tape. Next, turn the acetate sheet over so that the iridescent film is on the underside, and then fold the flaps of the acetate upwards along the fold lines that you have previously scored along. Drag a bone folder or a similar smooth plastic edge along the folds to make sure that they're nice and sharp. And now we need to add some more double-sided tape, and this time we're going to add the tape to all of the flaps. Once you've done that, then remove the protective film from the pieces of tape, no more than a few at a time so that you don't get into a mess, and start to attach each flap to the edge of acetate adjacent to it. Depending on what you want to use these shapes for, you will probably need to add some holes to the acetate sheet. In my case, I want to make a garland, so I need to add 2 holes to each shape on opposing sides. If you don't own a long upholstery needle and you want to turn these shapes into a garland, then now is the time that you need to thread your shapes. That's because after we've assembled these shapes in the next stage, they'll be nearly impossible to thread. Keep going until you've made the dodecahedron shape. The last steps can be a little bit fiddly. You can now make as many of these as you wish, and you can display them however you like. I personally made 5 of these shapes and displayed them as a garland at my window. In order to keep the shapes in place on the thread, you can simply add a little bit of super glue around the holes where the thread goes through the shapes. For demonstration purposes, I also added these shapes to a fairy light garland, as you can see here. To do this, you simply make 1 hole in each shape and then push a light into it. You could even place fairy lights in a large decorative bowl and then put these shapes on top to reflect that light outwards. Basically, there's lots of things you can do with this central idea, so I really hope it's given you some inspiration. Thank you very much for watching.